What happens when Hollywood's most iconic tough guy meets daytime television's most outspoken host? You won't believe what unfolds when legendary actor and director Clint Eastwood sits down with Joy Behar on The View, only to find himself in the middle of a political firestorm that ends with the most dramatic walkout in the show's history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. The tension was palpable from the moment Clint Eastwood walked onto The View set last night. At 94 years old, the man with no name still commanded respect and attention, his weathered face telling the story of decades in Hollywood. But what started as what should have been a celebration of his legendary career quickly devolved into one of the most heated confrontations ever captured on daytime television. Joy Behar, never one to shy away from controversy, seemed determined to push buttons from the very beginning. As Eastwood settled into his chair, adjusting his jacket with the deliberate movements of a man who had faced down countless adversaries both on screen and off, the atmosphere in the studio grew thick with anticipation. The audience, initially excited to see the legendary director, began to sense that something explosive was brewing. "So, Clint," Joy began with that familiar edge in her voice, "you've been pretty vocal about your political views over the years. Some would say you've been on the wrong side of history more than once." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and Eastwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The veteran actor leaned back in his chair, his steely gaze fixed on Behar. "Well, Joy, I've always believed in speaking my mind, whether people like it or not. That's what freedom means in this country, or at least it used to." The dig wasn't lost on anyone in the studio. Joy's smile became more strained as she pressed forward, clearly intent on drawing blood. "But don't you think some of your past endorsements and comments have been, let's say, problematic? Especially when it comes to issues of social justice and equality?" Eastwood's eyes narrowed, and for a moment the silence stretched uncomfortably long. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority that had made him a legend. "Problematic according to who? I've lived through more decades of American history than most people in this room. I've seen real discrimination, real hardship, and real progress. I don't need lectures from talk show hosts about what's right and wrong." The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Joy's face flushed red. She wasn't used to guests pushing back with such force, and it was clear she didn't appreciate being dismissed so casually. "Talk show hosts?" she repeated, her voice rising. "I'm a journalist, Clint. I've been asking tough questions for decades while you've been playing cowboys and making movies that glorify violence." That struck a nerve. Eastwood sat forward, his famous squint becoming more pronounced. "Glorify violence? Lady, I've made movies about the cost of violence, about redemption, about the complexity of human nature. What do? You sit behind a desk and throw stones at people who've actually accomplished something." The tension in the studio was now electric. Audience members were leaning forward in their seats, sensing they were witnessing television history. The other hosts seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. Joy, however, was just getting started. Her voice took on that shrill quality that regular viewers knew meant she was about to go nuclear. "Accomplish something? You mean like talking to empty chairs at political conventions? Or making tone-deaf comments about entire generations? Face it, Clint, your time is over. You're a relic from a bygone era that most of America is ready to move past." The insult about the empty chair routine, a reference to Eastwood's controversial appearance at the 2012 Republican National Convention, was a step too far. Eastwood's hands gripped the arms of his chair, and his voice dropped to that menacing whisper that had made him famous in westerns. "You know what your problem is, Joy? You confuse being loud with being right. You think because you can shout down your guests and get applause from your audience that you're some kind of truth teller. But all you are is a bully with a microphone." The accusation of bullying hit its mark. Joy's face contorted with rage as she practically shouted her response. "A bully? I'm holding you accountable. I'm asking the questions that need to be asked about your outdated, harmful worldview. The fact that you can't handle criticism shows exactly why people like you need to step aside and let progress happen." Eastwood stood up slowly, his full height casting a shadow over the desk. The movement was deliberate, controlled, but unmistakably threatening in its implications. "People like me," he repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. You mean people who built this country? People who fought in wars, who worked with their hands, who didn't need safe spaces and participation trophies? Yeah, I guess we are a dying breed, and people like you are what's replacing us. The studio fell deadly silent except for the hum of cameras capturing every moment of the confrontation. Joy, perhaps realizing she had pushed too far, tried to regain control of the situation. Clint, please sit down. We're having a discussion here. This is exactly the kind of toxic masculinity that... Toxic masculinity? Eastwood cut her off, his voice rising for the first time. You want to talk about toxic? How about the toxic environment you create on this show every single day? How about the way you ambush guests who don't share your political views? How about the way you use this platform to spread division and hatred while pretending you're some kind of moral authority? The other hosts finally tried to intervene, but Joy waved them off, her face now bright red with fury. You don't get to lecture me about hatred, Clint. Your movies, your politics, your whole persona is built on the glorification of a time when people like me didn't have voices. When women were supposed to sit down and shut up while men like you made all the decisions. Eastwood's laugh was bitter and cold. Is that what you think? That I want women to sit down and shut up? Lady, my daughter's tougher than most men I know, and she earned every bit of success she's had. But she didn't get there by screaming at people and calling them names. She got there with talent and hard work, concepts that seem foreign to you. The personal attack on Joy's work ethic was the final straw. She slammed her hand on the desk, her voice reaching a fever pitch. How dare you? I've worked my entire life to get where I am. I've faced discrimination and harassment that you couldn't even imagine. And I've used my platform to fight for people who don't have voices, something your privileged behind could never understand. Eastwood shook his head slowly, a look of disgust crossing his weathered features. There at Island, the victim card. When you can't win an argument on merit, you play the victim. Well, congratulations, Joy. You've proven exactly what's wrong with this country today. Everyone's a victim, everyone's oppressed, and anyone who disagrees is the enemy. The confrontation had reached a boiling point, with both combatants breathing heavily and staring each other down like gunslingers in an old western. The tension was so thick it seemed to physically press down on everyone in the studio. Joy made one final desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. You know what, Clint? You're right about one thing. There are enemies of progress in this country, and you're one of them. Your whole generation needs to get out of the way so we can finally move forward. Your time is done, old man. The old man comment was the final bullet in what had become a verbal shootout. Eastwood's eyes went completely cold, and when he spoke, his voice was steady but filled with a rage that seemed barely contained. Old man, I've lived through more history than you'll ever see. I've survived wars, economic collapse, social upheaval, and every other crisis you can imagine. And through it all, I've maintained my dignity and my principles. Can you say the same? He straightened his jacket with deliberate precision, his movements controlled despite the anger radiating from every fiber of his being. You want to know what's wrong with this country? It's not people like me. It's people like you who think screaming louder makes you right, who think attacking someone's age and experience somehow validates your ignorance. Joy tried to interrupt, but Eastwood held up a hand that silenced her immediately. I came here thinking we could have an intelligent conversation about my work, about my life, about the things I care about. Instead, I find myself being lectured by someone who wouldn't last 5 minutes in the real world I come from. The legendary actor began moving toward the edge of the set, his departure becoming inevitable with each step. You know what the difference is between you and me, Joy? I've spent my life creating things, building things, making things that will last long after I'm gone. All you do is tear things down, create division, and spread negativity. That's not courage. That's cowardice. Joy, perhaps sensing that she had lost control completely, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Clint, wait. We're not done here. You can't just walk away from this conversation. Eastwood paused at the edge of the stage, turning back with that famous half-smile that had graced 1,000 movie posters. But there was no warmth in it now, only cold amusement. Watch me, he said simply. And with those 2 words, Delivered with all the authority of a man who had dominated Hollywood for over 6 decades, Clint Eastwood walked off the View set, leaving behind a stunned audience, speechless co-hosts, and one very red-faced Joy Behar who realized she had just lost the biggest confrontation of her career to a 94-year-old man who had simply refused to be bullied.